Despicable.
This guy.
All right.
Despicable this guy.
I feel like we need to pivot from this conversation.
Pivot?
Yeah.
Honestly,
of pivot.
same.
Honestly, it is same.
Honestly, it is same. You ever think about pivoting? What'd you say earlier? You ever think about
I'm
quitting?
going to have
what
to
you're doing in life
trademark
and-
that so that everybody knows it was me
Yeah.
that said it.
Honestly, it is same.
I have
I
a
think it
feeling
was-
that it's going to be immortalized.
Well, yeah,
oh, you
except
said it
I
off
think I
camera.
don't know if I said it on camera or off camera.
Ooh.
I do think I said it on camera and you said it off camera and you're like, give me my credit.
Oh,
Give me
yeah.
my credit.
Man, that was...
Because honestly, it is
Wow,
same.
I love that
Honestly,
when I
it
said that
is
earlier.
same.
That was really funny. I love that you brought it back up when I said it earlier. That's
Yeah, that
awesome.
was a funny joke I made.
I feel like whenever I say funny stuff, it just gets ignored most
say
of the time.
it.
So when I do actually when it creates a
When it
splash,
sticks, yeah.
and then it's like, when you're hanging out with somebody and something happens and you'll be like, yeah, something or another under your breath, and
then
nobody hears
somebody
it.
else says it
and then
louder.
somebody
Yes.
else goes, yeah, hey, something or another, and everybody's like, ha ha ha,
Yes.
and you're like, okay, buddy.
All right, buddy.
That's how I feel right now.
Honestly,
Honestly, it is
I
same.
don't think you were cheering them on.
No,
I think you were
wasn't.
winding up to
I
punch them,
was.
but it looked like you were like, okay, buddy.
The fist
I said
bump.
all right, buddy. Honestly, it is
let's
same.
bring that back. When someone does something you don't,
I feel like
why
I'm
I
about
oughta.
Why,
How do you do it?
Apparently, I don't know how. Apparently, I was cheering.
It definitely, that's what it looked like. Honestly, same.
Ooh, honestly, same.
Honestly, same.
Honestly, same.
Honestly, same.
same. Honestly,
Honestly, same. Honestly, same.
Honestly, same.
Honestly, same.
Honestly, same. All
Well,
right.
hey.
Should we pivot into the podcast?
Let's pivot into making a podcast that's called Honestly Same. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the show. My name is Ross.
I'm Brittany.
I'm Leah.
And in this episode, we're going to figure out how to pivot this into a reasonable topic and a reasonable episode. Because in this episode, we're going to talk about, the idea of like failing at something, but learning to pivot into that, how that turns into growth, all that sort of stuff. How do we want to kick this one off?
Pivot. Like that.
Yes, just like that. Perfect.
Pivot.
What, because pulling the curtain back a little bit, we originally were going to talk about like failing in life and failures and how to deal with failure and all that sort of stuff. But we ultimately kind of centered that down and refocused it on, well, okay, we can't ever really say that we like fail because failing isn't necessarily finite.
Yeah.
Honestly,
Right.
like if something doesn't work out, you're usually going to find a different way, a different route to get there. Or if something fails and it doesn't work, it gives you the answer of like, oh wait, I don't want to put more work in to get that, so I don't actually want it. Great.
Pivot.
The failure was a lesson, but you're going to pivot to something else.
This whole time, I was just thinking about how finite sounds like a mineral.
I also saw a rock in my head when he said that.
Failing isn't a rock.
It's not
It's
just
not
a
solid.
boulder.
It's a rock.
It's a rock.
So where do we want to kick this one off when it comes to learning to pivot in life? Like, do we want to, I'm sure we'll share some stories of like maybe things that we feel like we did fail at or didn't succeed at, whatever it is and what those pivots meant. Or how do we want to dive into this?
How about
I think the first degree of a pivot is looking at the bright side of a situation, trying to find the silver lining of a situation and looking at it in a positive light. Is that what you were going to say?
Yeah, mainly where we go for what is that moment of, oh, I need to pivot. Like what is that?
What do I do about this?
Yes.
Yeah.
Because right now we're sitting in whatever this thing is, hypothetically, and like, what is that moment of clarity that gets us to pivoting?
Do you guys think that you're pretty quick to get to the pivot, or do you have to sit with your thing for like a minute where you're like, oh my God, this is happening?
I am terrified of change. It takes I love to pivot if I know what the outcome will be.
Okay.
But if it's like starting a new job that I don't know if I'll like the coworkers or the job at all or anything like that, I'm terrified. I'm not one that can like pack up and go.
That makes
like,
sense.
I love like my structure and my routine. So pivoting is a little bit hard for me.
I think my decision to pivot is very quick, but the process is what's slow. Like I embrace like that's the part that I'm going to sit and think about and be like, okay, what else do I do, or what else do I need to do, or what makes sense, or what, you know what I mean, like whatever that is. Where like when something isn't working and I'm like, okay, plan B, plan C, time to pivot, whatever. I'm pretty quick at being like, yeah, this thing isn't working. or it isn't making me feel the way that I wanted to feel, whatever it is, I need to do something else. That decision is rather
I have that quick.
But the process of it, I do take my time with, and I don't tend to rush things.
No.
Like-
I'm not talking about like the process of the pivot as a whole, but I'm talking about like the process of being in a situation. Like, so just as an example, I feel like in most households, there's one parent that's like, something's happening and they're running around like a chicken with their head cut off. And then there's one parent that's like, okay, this is what we're doing. Like, this is how we fix this. And I think, like in my relationship, I'm the one that's like, okay, what do we do?
Yeah,
How do we move from here? How do we move away from this? Whereas Nick is like, oh my God, I can't believe this is
Like
fucking
fawning,
happening.
just
Yes.
frozen.
Yeah,
Yes.
I'm definitely the first person.
Okay.
I'm the like, okay, well, what do we do? How do we solve this? What do we need to pivot into? What's the plan B? What's the second, whatever it is.
I think some people don't actually even like have like, I know people that will sit in a situation and just be like, oh, everything bad happens to me.
You know what I wonder though, because we are so equal in our people pleasing. A lot of my not anti-pivoting, but my nervousness to pivot is because I'm afraid I'm going to disappoint someone. Pivoting into a new job is going to disappoint everyone I'm leaving.
Yes.
And things like that. So that's why for me, like I can make the decision. I can be like, I'm getting the fuck out of this place.
Yes.
But it might take me 6 months because ultimately at the end of the day, I'm still putting people before me. Which I don't know how long it takes you. I know you said that like you'll slow down your process and like really figure out your stuff. A lot of people, when they're like, fuck this job, they pivot immediately without thinking.
So
You think a lot in pre-pivoting.
Yes, but I take we're going to say the word pivot so many times in this episode, but I will take like, this is the best way I can explain it. I'll do small pivots that lead up to the major one. So I don't sit in it and like overthink and it's 6 months worth of no progress. I'll identify that I need to make a change or solve something, fix something, whatever. And I will immediately take action in what are small things I can do to make this change. That then eventually when the time comes, it's like, okay, you know what? Now the time is right. Now it makes sense to completely move. And I'm not saying one way is right or wrong, but I do think a lot of people look at the choice of it's either black or white. It's either I stay here and I hate this thing and I live in it, or I have to make the choice tomorrow. If I don't leave my job tomorrow, I'm a failure. I'm an idiot for not doing this. If I don't end this tomorrow, like I feel like I've had a lot of conversations with people that go that route where they beat themselves up and like their thought process behind do I need to make a change is just that. It's just a thought process of like them identifying over and over, I need to make a change, and they effectively beat themselves up over it rather than identifying that like we don't necessarily have to wait until the perfect moment to make that change because that perfect moment does not exist. But I think it's just as important, like it's important to acknowledge the fact that a pivot, a change, a whatever isn't necessarily an overnight thing no matter what.
Yeah.
Because even if you quit a job today, using the job example, if you quit a job today and went into a new one tomorrow, you've still got to reprocess, restructure what your day looks like, what life looks like. Do you actually like that job? Is it actually fulfilling you in the way? Is it actually paying you what you thought? Like, there's all these sort of variables.
Sure.
So like, I feel like where my head always goes is I make incremental pivots that lead to a larger one. Like right now in life, like, and I don't know if it's actually going to turn into a major pivot or not. But the small ones that I'm making are like identifying like that the more I grow up, the more that my relationship with like creative career stuff changes. Where like 5 years ago or more, if I could just take a cool picture of anything doing whatever, I was like, oh my God, this is so cool. I'm so cool. I hope people like it. Where now I'm like, I don't have to, like, if all my, and we've talked about this on other episodes, but like if all my creative ventures went away tomorrow, I would be bummed. But I know the things that I enjoy, the things that I want to do, how I want to connect with things, all that sort of stuff. I know that if I had to make a major pivot, like I know where that comes from, right? And I feel like I say all that to say that identifying that, knowing that like my identity isn't wrapped up in that one thing, I've been making incremental pivots that slightly change my relationship with those things. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Like I'm actively saying like, I still love doing photo shoots, but I've pivoted away from
Slightly, but like you're not fully pivoting. You're
exactly.
Like
I'm not being a photographer and doing this thing over here. It's like, no, I still do that.
Yeah.
But my relationship with that's what's changed. And I think that's like a layer of pivoting. That's like, and maybe I'm jumping too far ahead of what we kind of wanted to talk about, but like, I almost think a pivot doesn't always have to be a major thing. I think small pivots exist and can still make a form of change that you were looking for.
I
Like
agree.
you don't have to change your life completely, but it's like, okay, what if I changed my approach to this thing? What if I changed how I communicate with this person? What if I changed my, whatever it is? Like,
I feel like the kind of person where I'm like, I want to try to make, when I'm committed to something like a job or something like that, I'm going to try to make small changes within it before I completely pivot as well, to see like, is there something I can do to make this more livable? Is there something to make, this situation better that I can do or to offer, before making a full pivot out of the situation as a whole. So I feel like small pivots for me live in that of like, oh, like maybe I don't want to pivot away from something. Like, I think some people will like have an experience and be like, nope, I'm out of here. Like, I'm the person where I'm like, no, like it might have just been a fluke thing. Like, let's try to fix it. Let's try to like have a better experience, within it or whatever, before being like, all right, no, like it's just not meant to be, sort of a thing.
yeah. Brittany, what were you going to say? Do you remember?
No, I'm here for the vibes.
Okay. But I do think like, you might have already explained this, but like, Brittany, like, where do you feel like you land with that? Are you the person who is like, yeah, cool, I will make incremental changes? Because I know also when we say that, somebody listening could be like, duh, of course you're going to try and solve the problem for avoiding it. I actually disagree. I think the vast majority of people tend to live in the problem, and they might subtly make changes, but like they're not actual changes that like change the outcome.
Yeah.
It's just sort of like, oh, well, I guess when I go to work today, I won't talk to that person. That avoids the thing. It's like, well, no, that's just a decision right now that doesn't necessarily build to something later.
Yeah.
Because I feel like, again, that is something that I talk to people about a lot, where I don't think people make those small necessary changes as often as maybe we think we do. So I know us explaining that probably sounds very general, and it's like, well, duh,
No,
but it's like, I don't think so.
I think everybody listening can connect to that, though, of being like, there's always like, everybody knows one person that's just like, yeah, everything sucks.
Life is just
like,
hard.
And life just keeps shitting on me. And like, I've had a really hard life. Like, you can, if you take responsibility for everything that's ever happened to you in your life, and I'm not saying it's your fault, but it's your problem. It's your problem to solve.
Yeah, what is your reaction to it?
Yes. Like, what are you going to do about it? Like, yeah, maybe life has dealt you some shitty hands, but like, are you going to pivot away from this? Like, how are you going to pivot away from it? Because there are people, everybody knows a person like that. That's just like, oh, I don't know, man. It's just my life. This is just
my life's just crazy. My life's just chaos. Like, yeah. So where do you land?
I'm like between the things, because I have those moments where I am just simply too much is happening to make any rational decision. Anything would feel irrational to do. I can make little pivots. Like, I think that I make little pivots often to make my life better, but like big pivots, there has to be like a catalyst for me, only because I tend to find like the good in life. I'm pretty content everywhere I am with whatever I'm doing. I don't do things I don't want to do. So if I get put into a position that I don't want to be in, I have an easier time pivoting like out of the uncomfortableness. I like refuse to sit in uncomfortableness.
Yes. It's when you're in a comfortable position that you know is not good for you, but it's livable. Those are the hardest things to pivot from.
Because then you are kind of blind to the fact that anything is wrong. You feel like a certain way, but you can't really put your finger on it, or it is just one other person maybe. So you're like, that is such a small piece to the puzzle. Do I really need, how could I really remedy that? But I feel like, it's all about the little. You're like, we're going to say pivot so much, and I cannot.
I know, right?
I can't stop. It's all about the little pivots for me. I've made a couple big ones, but I think the little ones tend to be more monumental to me because I already keep myself in a pretty comfortable position.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think
that definitely makes sense.
There's a lot of like probably subconscious pivots that a lot of people make of like, oh, that thing made me feel this way. I'm gonna now go around that. I'm gonna avoid that. I'm gonna change my relationship with that. I do think there is value in sometimes slowing down a little bit on whatever journey you're on, whatever it is, and identifying those things. Like,
And I
what
think
do I need to change?
This episode
Like,
specifically will be good for people because we are talking about a whole bunch of nothing right now.
Yes.
But it is something that every single person deals with that we don't
Yeah.
acknowledge. We don't put until today. How many times have you said the word pivot?
Exactly.
Even though you do
Yes.
it all the
I've
time.
probably said
Right.
pivot as many times today as I have in my
Your
entire
entire life, yes.
Yeah, because, and that's what it's exactly what I'm saying. It's like, it is important to shine light on those and things that don't ultimately seem like it's that big a deal. Like, yes, to
Yeah.
your point, like, yeah, somebody could be listening to us right now, like, what the fuck are you guys talking about? You're just talking about like making changes. Duh, that's life. And it's like, yeah, but like if you're just kind of like
we're talking like
coasting
big life
with things
changes,
and
like
yeah, and
like when something comes into your life, like one of the main things is like, okay, how do you see the bright side of a shitty situation? Like if something comes into your life where it is like maybe you don't even have like like maybe it's not your decision, maybe you lose your job, maybe you get laid off, like something like that happens, like how do you see the silver lining of the situation in order to pivot?
Yeah, kind of remove yourself fully from that situation instead of being the victim to whatever the circumstance was, because a lot of the times we are, if you get laid off or whatever. Just like, what is your next move?
Yeah, because you can't sit there and dwell on things that you can't change. If you don't have any control over them whatsoever, nothing is going to change by you sitting there and worrying about it. Okay, well, what are you going to do for yourself in that situation?
yeah. And I think there's a difference between like working in something and working on something. A lot of us tend to work in something actively, right? We're in it, stuff is just happening to us, we might be making progress and all that sort of stuff, but it's like contained in kind of one area. It's like, yeah, I'm making progress, but it's like here.
Yeah.
Right.
Rather than being able to take that slight step back, get a slight perspective change, and be able to work on a situation. Those
Yeah.
are two different things. Living in it and then being able to step back and look at it and be like, what do I actually need to change here?
Yeah. Well, and I think that pivotal moments are also really important because they help us look at our lives and think, okay, what do I want or need in my life at this moment?
Because what we want or need can change
Yeah.
day to day.
Like
And, yeah,
imagine it's like, let's say a breakup. Like maybe it's not your decision. Nobody wants to go through a breakup. They're never fun. But I would say, like, imagine you go through a breakup and then you're like, oh my gosh, now I have to like, maybe you live with this person. Maybe you're like, I need to find a new place to live. I need to like figure out like, who do you want to be in this moment and how do you get there?
Yeah.
Sort of.
Like
Yeah.
forced pivots really show people what they are capable of. I think they're really cool. When I think about my biggest pivots, they were forced on me,
Okay.
if that makes sense.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
breaking up and we live together. So now I need to find a place to live and grieve this relationship and process anything that's happened in the last 2 years. That all of those things are going to lead to like a huge pivot where I'm
Yeah.
living, what I'm doing, who
you
I'm
are.
associating with now. Yeah, who I am. And I do think that it usually takes something like pretty big like that to see a big result, because you don't get the opportunity to be like, I'm now homeless. What could I do today to make that a little bit better for
Yeah,
me, you know?
Yeah.
So I do think that a lot of pivots come from like the catalyst of something big happening, and finding what the bright side's going to be. Okay, now I'm going to live by myself, but now I get to live by myself.
Now I get the whole bed to myself. I can watch whatever I want. I can decorate the space however I want. It's like those types of things where you have to look at like, yeah, maybe that person, like maybe it didn't work out the way that you wanted it to, but it's like now you get to almost create a new version of yourself that is alone or that doesn't have that job. Maybe now you can like go and like chase that ambition that you've had for a long time of like, you know, I've always kind of wanted to do this thing, but I've been waiting around because I had this job that took up too much of my time. Well, now you don't have that job anymore. Now maybe you do the thing that you actually want to do and see what can come of it. Like
That's that's one of the first things that happened to me that pushed me into being freelance. Was like I got a job at a social media agency and I was like, oh, this is exactly what I want to do. This is incredible. It was such a terrible, stupid job. I got fired. And of course I'm like, oh my God, this sucks, blah, blah, blah. But it gave me my first push into, I was like, well, I'm here.
Yeah.
I'm unemployed. Let's just transfer that to like creatively unemployed now. Like, and I'll
Yeah.
call it freelancing. Like, you know what I mean? It's like that push came from that though, from like losing something. And at that point in time, it was a job, and a job that I was like, oh, this is really sick. But then it ultimately was like, no, it wasn't actually.
Yeah.
But thankfully they made the decision for me.
Yeah.
I got
Yeah.
fired, and but it gave me that push to then be able to make that change, to make that pivot into, let's just go ahead and give this whole self-employment thing a shot rather than like worrying about the safety net constantly being there. And like, there's always going to be jobs ultimately, you know, there's always going to be something that someone, you know, you can do. So it's like, okay, well in that sense, like I knew at that point in time, like, cause I'd also worked at Lowe's. I'm like, I can go work at Lowe's at any point in time, you know, it's like, am I going to love it? No. Would I be happy? No.
Yeah.
But I could go do that if needed. And it's like, okay, cool. This was a forced pivot that, cool, it pushed me into trying something new out of my comfort zone that ultimately led to the thing that I wanted, which was self-employment.
Yes.
When you guys think of, like, I know we have a note of like the methods of clarity. So like, what does that mean to you guys? Like, what does clarity mean to you guys in these processes? Like, is there something that you like go to? Is there something like, have we already talked about it of like stepping back and identifying things? Like,
I have one like specific instance that I can think of. I think sometimes the clarity comes like right before the pivot or sometimes a little bit after, where you're like, oh, that is why I made this, what I thought was an irrational decision. But I remember in one of my previous relationships where I lived with the person, I remember sitting in the mirror one day and just being like, I would be literally looking at myself in the eyes and being like, you would be okay if you left this relationship. You'd be okay if he left, and you would be okay if you left. And like, why would I ever need to like say that to myself unless I was kind of gearing up to pivot? That scenario, I remember that so specifically. That scenario set me up to like be able to pivot, that tiny little pivot of talking to myself, into a big pivot of what my life is now, and just taking, and I think it was the mental clarity of being like, you don't like this situation and you will live getting out of this situation. Because a lot of things for me, very emotional girly, end of the world. Everything's the end of the world. You say something in the wrong tone to me, or I can't decipher your text, I'm like, do I need to cut this person off? Just in that moment, I'm great with like communicating, but truly, like, if my emotions are dragged to a certain place, it will feel like the end of the world, and it will result in a pivot for me.
Okay. Leah, what were you going to jump into?
I lost it a little bit.
I'm sorry.
No, I was like so into what you were saying that I was just like, yeah, that's, you go. Bro.
I've got mine.
Yeah,
if you want me to
go
go.
ahead.
So
I'll just not listen to what you're saying. And
yes,
Yeah, there we go.
if you can, disassociate for a second while I speak, and then pop back in. Interrupt me at any point in time once you have your notes. I'm big on clarity, and I don't want this to sound like I'm gonna get life coachy for a second, and this is gonna sound super big, but it's not. Once I identified like what my why was as a person
For existing?
kind of, yes. And I don't mean like my ultimate purpose is to do this, but like what brings me joy, what fulfills me, and what do I want to give to others? Like, I genuinely kind of believe when you can identify those things, I don't think it's just one thing, but when you can identify that, it makes pivoting easier, because it's almost like I have the cheat code. It's like I have the cheat sheet to go off of. So when the question arises, I already kind of know what the answer is. Now it's just, how do I do it?
Yeah.
And so for me, whether I'm making a career change or something in life is pivoting, like even if it's really difficult and not that fun, if I can still tie it back to like, well, okay, well, why do I want to do this? Or ultimately, like, what am I doing that fulfills me? How am I connecting with people? How am I whatever? And like, that's probably a whole other topic for a whole other episode. But like, when you can identify what, like, kind of just what you want at your core.
How is it enriching your life, though?
Yeah.
Like what is this doing for me? Like, I have, sorry to cut you off, but like the way you said it, I'm like, I have clients that come to me. I have friends that like I'll talk to, and they'll be like, I'm dating this guy and he keeps cheating on me, and like, you know, blah, blah. And I'm like, I literally look at them and I go, what are you getting out of this relationship that's positive? What are you actually getting out of it? And they're kind of like nothing. I mean, out of a job or a situation, you're literally like, I mean, I guess I'm getting paid,
Right.
but like, you're also spending how much of your time and effort on something. And then it's like, again, like, how is it enriching your life? How is it filling your cup? Like, you have to look at those things and be like, that is your source of clarity, is like looking at your values and how the things that you're doing or the people in your life or whatever those things might be are contributing to that.
Yeah, and I'm not saying it all of a sudden works perfectly. Like, there's still things that I'm like, whoa, why did this create a problem? I gotta pivot out of this, blah blah blah. But like, that's even why I said earlier, like, it would suck, but I'm pretty confident in, if all my creative endeavors went away and I had to make a major complete life pivot, I would ultimately be fine, because I know what brings me joy, what fulfills me, what fills my cup up, all that
Yeah.
sort of like what I want out of interactions and what I want out of life in general and connections and all this sort of stuff. Knowing that, I can effectively kind of reverse engineer any decision, any issue, any problem that comes my way. Doesn't make them easy at all. There's still plenty of stuff that happens and I'm like, yeah, fuck this. Like, this sucks. Why do I have to deal with this? And they're not always that easy. But I do think that, like, at least for me and my method of clarity when it comes to these things, understanding as much of myself as humanly possible helps me reverse engineer every
why
single
is this
thing
ticking.
Yes. So it's like if I do a video production and I'm like, the last 6 of these weren't fun, rather than just being like, well, that's what I do. I'm a video director, so I guess I have to figure out how to make it fun. It's like, well, I've tried a lot of things to make it fun and it's not. Is it time to pivot to something else?
Yeah.
But identifying why. Is it video production I don't like, or is it the fact that I'm not being creatively fulfilled? Is it the people that I'm doing it with? Am I not having a fun time? Am I not, it's like, whatever that is, like those are, again, the small pivots that then can be worked on.
And nobody can tell you those things.
Right.
You're the only person
no
that
one's
can
gonna-
identify those things. Like, I feel like
Exactly.
so many people, they're just like, I don't understand, like, what, like, why it's not lining up or why it's not hitting the same or whatever. And you're like, you have to know.
How does it connect to you? How does it relate to
Yes.
you? How does it make
Absolutely.
you feel? Like, yes, your job might suck. Okay,
Again,
let's identify why.
It's just back to like everything. There's so much good, like selfishness if you're not affecting other people and just like worrying about yourself and constantly like bringing it back to like, how is this making me feel? What can I do?
Yeah.
Which I'm talking to myself because I will be worried about everyone else and how my decisions will affect them.
Yes.
Right.
I mean, of course.
And it doesn't mean that, like, yeah, obviously when you're sitting and you're focusing on like, how does this affect me? It's like, there are people who take that too far of like, when you did this to me, it made me feel this way. It's like, well, you're avoiding the whole other part of the scenario here. Like, it's always, and that's life and human beings
Yeah.
is everyone's, emotions are intertwining and all this sort of stuff and perspectives. But ultimately what you're saying is like, yeah, when you're identifying these things, you also do need to be conscious of, well, okay, how does this affect or how does this tie to somebody else?
Yeah.
But
I
then
would
ultimately,
say
what do I actually need to do?
lots of people's pivoting is not personal. Like it's never to spite whatever they're pivoting away from. It's just simply they need to get into like a more comfortable environment for themselves. And I'm saying that because that is how it is for me. And pivoting shouldn't feel like scary if you can see what the future is going to be in that.
Yeah.
Even if you can't see what it is, it still shouldn't be scary given how you think other people are going to react to it if it does not personally affect them.
Right.
Yes.
So let's share like individual moments of like
Well, I
what like where
remember-
we've all.
I
Oh, did you
remembered
remember?
my-
Okay. Yes.
Leah's like,
I wrote it down at one point because I was like, don't forget again. For me, the clarity comes from my OCD. I always have intrusive thoughts. And so I always kind of bounce to worst case scenario. Like, how is this going to affect other people? How is this going to affect me? And when you go to the worst case scenario, you have to go into your brain and think about like, okay, so like, let's say I could make this change, but like in the worst case scenario, it would be like, oh, okay, well maybe I do want to like live somewhere else, but like I could lose this like job that I have. And it's like, oh, okay. So if that's the worst case scenario, you might lose your job, but like that opens the opportunity for you to get a new job. Like you have to look at the worst case scenario and be like, what is the absolute worst thing that could happen?
Yes.
And then analyze like, okay, why is that the worst thing that could happen? And what could you do about the worst
and
case
is it
scenario?
worse than whatever you're already dealing with that you are considering making a big change because of?
Yeah. Like imagine you live somewhere and you're just like absolutely miserable there. Imagine you live in Florida and you're just like, everything here sucks. It's
Everyone's
so
on
hot.
bath salts.
Nobody can drive.
Florida listeners, I'm sorry. I think
You know it's true.
Yeah, they would definitely agree.
you're right.
But I feel like you live somewhere and you're just like, oh my gosh, like I can't live this way because it's affecting my health. You know, like I live where I'm allergic to everything. And sometimes I'm like, man, it would be nice to just get out of this position here. But again, I'm like, okay, I have to outweigh like, okay, well, what are the good things about where I live or where I work or who I'm with? with the like, okay, well, these are the things that I'm not as happy about in this situation. And in the worst case scenario, like you said, is it going to come to a point where it's like, it'll be just as bad but different? Or is it going to be better but different? Or is it going to be worse but different? Like, and like you said, sometimes it's forced pivoting and sometimes it is a decision. But I think the clarity part comes from, if it is out of your control, you have to be able to look at the situation and go, all right, if this is worst case scenario, where like what are the things that I can get from this?
Right.
Well, how do I grow from this?
Something else on that too is like, I also think there's a lot of value in identifying the root of why something needs to change.
Yeah.
Because I also talk to people who, for the simple example, is like, they want to make it in the creative world. They want to like do video or photo or whatever. Their assumption that the only solution they have is they have to move somewhere like Hollywood to make it. That's not the root of the problem you're trying to solve. The root is, how do you build yourself up? How do you make connections? How do you perfect your art form? Or, not perfect, but whatever. Like, there's so many of those sort of things. So it's like, I also think there's a lot of like, when we're talking about the clarity part, it is identify the root of the problem. Identify the root of the issue, the root of the whatever it is we're wanting to change, not just the outward thing. Oh, well, if I lived somewhere else, my life would just be so much cooler. I don't think that that's true. It would be cool in the honeymoon phase of the first month or two or whatever it might be, where you're experiencing new things. And I'm not saying to never move somewhere new.
Yeah.
But I do think a lot of people identify things like that. They identify like the surface of the problem. Again, if I live somewhere else, my life would be cooler. Ultimately, no, because you're not pivoting. You're not changing the root of what is causing the issues, whether it's something internally in you, your relationships with other people, how you're navigating life, whatever it is. If those changes are not made, they're going to find you no matter where you are.
Yeah.
And so it's ultimately like, I do think there's a ton of work that sometimes have to be done, that needs to be done in that side of clarity. It's not just identify the problem and, again, I'll move over here, or I'll go get this job, or I'll go, all my jobs suck. I'll go get a different job. Well,
and it's
why?
like, well, okay,
what do you not like about those
what
jobs?
Is it? And I mean, we all know somebody that's a job hopper, or somebody that literally, like I said, just ends up in these like relationships where you're like, why do you keep going for people like this? And it is an internal thing where it's like, okay, what about you is like making you apply to these jobs that you hate? Like, if it looks like something where after like the first month you're just gonna be like, man, why am I doing this? I mean, it couldn't have been that like bright, shiny, and amazing when you first, like, I think there's just like an internal thing you have to work on in some ways, like to be like, again, like the root of it, like, why are these relationships why are all these relationships ending and these people are saying that I'm this way? Like, why they all say, why is everybody like this? So it's like, well, maybe you're like this, sort of a thing.
Right.
And being able to identify, like, do you need to pivot in your, like, stance of things as well? So not only like, oh, instead of I hate this job, I need to like go get another job and then another job and then another job all within like 6 months or whatever. It's like, yeah, of course you don't want to stay somewhere where you're not happy, but like, is it that these places specifically are actually all that bad, or is it that you are not getting what you need from these situations?
There's a lot more value in making a pivot from a place internally rather than just trying to change everything externally all the time. Again, changing my environment, changing my job, changing my relationship, changing my blah, blah, blah. And it's like, not saying all those things don't work because it's your fault. It's not saying that, but it's saying you need to more clearly identify what you're looking for in these things, what you're not getting. And then it comes down to like, okay, are there changes that you do need to make? Stop accepting friends that are like this, who treat you this way, and then 6 months you have to have a huge falling out with. Stop getting into relationships that are shitty and abusive and not fun or whatever just because they were nice to you that one time. It's like, okay, like we are going to continue the same cycles over and over if we're only changing something externally, thinking that that will change everything else. That can bring good elements to your life. Making that change could eventually, oh, finally, this person is great for my life. This job is great for my life. But again, that stuff might only last so long, or might be like a version of good that's not ultimately good, because again, I do think it all comes down to clarity within and making those internal changes of like, what do I actually need? Not necessarily like, how do I talk to this person? No. What do you need from that relationship?
Yes.
What do you need from that friendship? What do you want to give? What do you need from that job? What are you willing to give? Like, so then you're not walking into a job and like, well, I get $15 an hour, but I have to do this and that and this and that. And my boss sucks. And it's like, okay, what would your ideal situation look like going to that job? Because maybe instead of stacking boxes, you actually really enjoy structure and paperwork.
Yeah.
So, okay, how can you find a job that serves that? And so then you're not stacking boxes doing something you hate. And then ultimately you'll find out that maybe the money kind of matters a little bit less.
Yeah.
Because then you might find a job that's $12 an hour. And then you're like, oh yeah, but I really get to do this thing that I enjoy and I'm learning a lot and I'm helping and blah, blah, blah. Like
Yeah.
that's such a specific like rabbit
Right.
hole we just went down. But like, I say all that to say, I don't necessarily think that only changing our external is going to solve the problem. Like what spawned this thought is what Leah said of like, you do have to look internally.
Mm-hmm.
And that goes back to figuring out the clarity on why you do or do not want something. What are you actually looking for?
Yeah.
So off of that, when have we identified certain things weren't working or major changes that we needed to make or a collection of small pivots or whatever that looks like? Do we have kind of big things like that? Like I've got mine, but
I said mine. Well, I can think of another one, but I did have my whole breaking up, moving out.
I think a lot of mine have been in relationships for sure, where I was, even in friendships, where like I was associating with people that, you know, weren't good for me. And I kept attracting this same kind of person that was like so much of a drain for me without me getting anything in return for that relationship, friendship, whatever it was. And then I had to, I feel like I never had that internal look of like, what is this doing for you really? What are you getting out of this really? Are you actually happy with the way this is going?
I just want to say in this that when you're trying to like internally do that in a relationship, how close it can be to victim blaming on yourself.
Yeah.
Because no one gets into a relationship thinking this person's going to be a piece of shit to me.
Right.
That's something you learn along the way, and then you have to figure out how to pivot within that.
Yeah.
So I think sometimes like the internal dialogue of like, how did I get myself in this situation is really not fair when there's so many like not great humans out there.
That, and not to mention like trauma bonding is such a thing. So like even though you might be like, oh my gosh, this situation's not great for me, it might not also be great for them, but you guys are bonded in the fact that it's not great. And then you feel almost a guilt of like, if I leave this situation, then how's it going to be for this person type of a thing. And I feel like I've had relationships like that, were friendships in the past, where I was like, this person is draining me of like happiness, of energy, you know, they're taking advantage of the fact that I'm a good friend to them, and what am I getting out of it, and but then also how are they going to survive without me there to take care of them, basically. And I feel like I've had to pivot out of maybe a place in my life. I don't even know if I would say it was specifically relationships, but a place in my life where I just allow anybody to walk in and be like, you know, front and center in a way where I'm like, oh, everybody is immediately important and everybody gets the same amount of importance. And, you know, if you need something from me, I will give that to you without question. Like I've learned that, like, I think I've had to pivot away from a place of people pleasing, maybe in a way, in order to get to a place where I can take care of myself a little bit better.
Right.
So I think I've been slowly, I'm still in that pivot in a lot of ways. But I think that having to look at like ways that I have maybe crumbled under the pressure of like taking care of so many people and things has gotten to a point now where like I almost just am numb to the guilt to a point where I'm like, okay, I'm almost not forced, but feeling like I've hit my limit to a point where I'm like, I need to pivot into a different mode of who I am and how I'm acting and what I'm giving and receiving in order to feel like I'm not failing myself in a way. So that's kind of, I feel like, I don't know if that's not a specific enough.
I kind of interrupted you when you were saying like that your biggest pivot was via relationship.
Yeah, I would say I definitely have had friendships in the past where Like, I remember a specific example of I had a friend that like I would drive 2 hours to go pick her up and then I would bring her back to my place and she would just like lay all her troubles out for me, and being the person that I am and I love to help people through their struggles and everything like that. It was like I would sit there and be like, "Oh, I'm going to listen and I'm going to help this person." But then when it was like, "Hey, like my turn to either lay something down or have something returned in my direction," it was, "Oh, well, I can do this for you if I get something out of it," sort
Yeah.
of thing.
Or
Yeah.
life's just like that because I can only see myself as a person and not you.
Yes, exactly. Where it's like, okay, well, I could sit here and, pamper you all day and, put you on a throne and on a pedestal. But, at the end of the day, are you going to do the same for
Right.
me, sort of a thing? So I've had a couple of different like friendships and relationships that ended in those ways where I was really like putting myself out there and not having the same in return.
Yeah.
So I would say like, sure, I could come up with specific examples, that one for sure, but like, yeah, I think it's been a theme a little bit.
Yeah. Something I'd be interested in, I don't know how much you want to share about, but I also think that a lot of people, something they do becomes their identity, and then pivoting out of that or changing what that looks like. For me, when I think about something that you and I have talked about a ton, is your music career.
Yeah.
Because I feel like that has taken a change and pivoted into what you enjoy out of making music. Because and obviously I'm not going to tell your story for you, but like the reason I'm bringing it up is like anytime we talk about that stuff or have in the past, it's like the goal was like, I'm in a band, we're writing music, we're getting signed, we're going on tours. Oh my gosh, this is going to work. This is going to work out this way. And then ultimately like that turns into something that didn't work out that way.
Yeah.
So then you had to pivot your relationship with music and how you want to make it and why, and realizing probably that it's like, oh, I enjoyed that version, but that's actually not, I'm not too worried about that. As long as I can just sing and make some songs and have some fun. Like,
Yeah. Well, and I think that's all what it began as. You know what I mean? Like, so, my career in music started off because I love music and I wanted to do music so bad, and I wanted to create music with people that I had a community within. I grew up with like uncles, that my dad was like bandmates, with since he was in high school, middle school, maybe even. And so like I wanted that for myself. And so my why, became this is something that's important to me that I want to have because I love music and I want to feel this bond with people with music. And then I met my band and it was like everything I wanted it to be, but then slowly over time the why started shifting, and it was about, instead of being about we love what we're doing and we're doing this because we enjoy it and it's fun, it became how do we make this successful and how do we make a living doing this? Because that's the whole thing, is like if you want it to be something where you're doing it seriously, like beyond a point of just like, oh, like we tour sometimes, like if you want it to be like your main gig, you have to basically like sell your soul, you know what I mean, to be like, I'm not doing anything else. And we did that. I mean, we were fully immersed in it. We lost relationships, we lost jobs. Like there were so many things that we sacrificed in order to get to where we were. And it got to a point where we were like, all right, we've sacrificed a lot and we're not doing this for the same reasons as we started. It started off as we're doing this because we love it and we're having a good time and we have this connection with each other. And then it slowly became, we're doing this because this is what's going to sell and this is what people are going to like, instead of what do we like. And so I think all of us had to sort of pivot into like the parts of our lives that were like calling towards us for more important reasons, oh, like I need to be more involved with my family business because this is something that matters to me. I am in debt from being in this band and spending my personal money, and I have all these school loans, and I, decided that this for me is something that's like causing more harm than good, and I'm burnt out on it. Or it just, there were a lot of different things and reasons for all of us to pivot because the why was no longer synonymous. So I feel like for me, my personal pivot was really was a difficult struggle because I didn't have a new why. You know what I mean? Like I was like, oh, like, yeah, I can still, like, music is still there and I've pivoted away from it being my main everything. But I will say, like, I have pivoted away from doing it almost as a whole at this point because I almost needed the why to be a little more solid for me to be doing it at all. Like I enjoy it, and every now and then I'll have like a day or something where I'm like, yeah, I really needed this today. Like this was music and this was my outlet. But like if I'm forcing myself into doing anything musical, it kind of like I'm like, no, I need to sit down and write today. It gives me this connotation of like, but why? If I'm not feeling like I need to do it, then why am I doing it? Just because everybody around me is like, you better keep doing music. You better not give up on this thing.
Exactly.
And it's like, yeah, there are other things I'm focusing on right now, you know, in my life. And it's not to say that, you know, you can't pivot away from something and still care about that thing or, you know, still look back on it fondly even. But yeah, as far as like my music career goes, I feel like it was definitely the why for me was like my reason for pivoting, and then, you know, looking for the silver lining type thing. I was like, oh, I've always wanted to go to hair school and I never felt like I'd have the time. And so then I was like, well, and even at the time as well, like I thought I would never have time to settle down and have a family. And initially, like, I thought that was something I wanted and I wanted to do. And those were things that I was like, okay, well, now I actually have a time and place for these things. And that was my silver lining or my clarity of like, these are the things that I can pivot to, or things that, you know, I can do that will give me a direction and a new sense of fulfillment, basically.
Right. And that's even kind of why I bring that up. And because we talked about this a little bit earlier too, is like, mine is similar in that sense of it's very easy for a lot of us to attach our identity and our being to things that we do.
Yeah.
Not letting the things we do be extensions of what we are. And that is where I got trapped for a while, because at some point, like when it came to, you know, video directing and stuff like that, I hated it. At one point in time, I was like, this is stupid. Why am I freelancing? Why am I doing any of this? Like, and it's still like a balance that kind of goes back and forth sometimes. But I have a way further clarity on why I do and do not want to do these things, which allows me to pick and choose in different ways. But like that for me was like, that's also my version of a major pivot. Is at one point in time, I literally was like telling my like team members and all this sort of stuff that I'm like, I'm going to not do this anymore. I want to go do something else.
Also, I think a huge pivot for you would have been like if you were like, hey, I'm not enjoying this in a creative way anymore. Bring me on for, you know, specific things that I will enjoy. Like, it's not that I don't want to do this.
And that's what it took to figure out what that pivot needed to be.
Yeah.
The pivot wasn't, I no longer make videos or I no longer do creative things. The pivot was, I still do that, but I do it differently.
Yeah.
Now I do it in a different version where I wasn't wrapping all of my happiness and fulfillment into, did this one video that we just did last week, did it go perfectly? Did the client love it? Was it amazing? Was it the coolest thing to ever exist?
Yeah.
That's kind of what the chase was a little bit, just like you were saying with the band stuff, like doing it for like the external validation of like, is this what somebody's going to think is really cool, rather than, wait, do I think that this is cool?
Yeah.
That's all that I need. And so when that was the biggest thing for me, is like when I made that pivot into, I'm going to, in a positive way, be selfish about this stuff. I'm going to make sure I'm doing things for me. Ultimately, yes, for, you know, the client, for somebody else. I want them to enjoy it, everybody to enjoy the process. But what do I need out of it? And then what do I want to give? And again, bringing that clarity into it, identifying that why helped with that pivot, because it made me step back and identify that why of like, why are you even doing this? Why are you doing this? It's not about the cool visuals anymore. It's not about looking cool on the internet anymore.
Yeah.
Like 100%, way too tied up in that for a while. But now I can say like, oh no, not worried about that.
Yeah.
Like it cool, comes with the territory. I get it. Everybody wants to be an influencer nowadays, but it's like, I'll share what I like to share. I'll make what I want to make. And yes, I hope business does well, and I want clients, and I want to be self-employed forever and all this sort of stuff. But ultimately, that all had to go back and return to my root cause as to why I was doing it. And so that for me was my big thing of, I literally hated all the stuff that I was doing, but it was because I identified only with that. I did not have an identity on my own of like the classic phrase of like, who are you when no one else is around?
Yeah.
I sort of had an idea, and if somebody really asked me, I probably could have articulated it, but I didn't really know what that was. Now, and I've said it plenty of times on this podcast at this point, it's like I can, not saying I want to take major life changes on, but like if and when those things happen, I feel better prepared to deal with them because again, I know kind of the core that everything else is spinning around. What were you? Do you remember what you were going to say? Okay.
Sure don't.
Still here for the vibes. Still here for the vibes.
Yes. Been vibing this whole time. So
yeah.
I think the biggest point in this, something I don't want to lose is like the whimsy of life, because we've been very like, these are the steps that we take. Like motivationally speaking, when there's so much more to being human.
Of
so
course.
like don't beat yourself up on if your pivots are not happening.
No.
Utilize the people around you, ask for advice. I think a lot of the times I didn't ask for advice on things I wanted to do because if I did not pivot after letting people know that I considered that, then I would have felt like a failure or whatever.
Yeah.
What was my second thing? Oh, my second thing is, I think what we're saying, if we had to put something in bold on this episode, is to find what intrinsically motivates you. Not even just makes you happy, but makes you keep going. If we are looking at this in a, how do we make our relationships work? How do we make like our job work? Setting aside the whimsy of everything else that happens on earth, is like, what is going to make me feel good? Like doing music at home makes me feel better than when I'm on the road. Creating things for me makes me feel better than when I create for other people. And I'm literally only going to feel a certain way if I get a certain validation from them. So finding that thing that you're like, wow, I feel really good that I did this. It's not about how you make other people feel, unless that is your job and that is your purpose and your intention.
Yeah.
Right. Yes. Because ultimately, I think there are a lot of things too that's like, I can identify that when I bring other people joy, that gives me joy. That fills my cup up,
Yeah.
right? But it until you can identify what those things are, then yes, we are just going to kind of.
I feel like, and it's almost like a pinwheel. Like you're at the center. So if you're at the center and this is your job and you're pivoting towards something else, you still need to be the point that's sitting solid so that the other pieces can rotate around you. If you're not solid, you're going to be all over the place if you're trying to move. So I think that's, it's just like you said, you have to know yourself. You have to know what you need. You have to know what's important to you and what you require, because not only like do pivots come from need, but they also come from want sometimes. And sometimes the need overshadows the want. Obviously, like you need money. So like if you can't leave your job because, you need to be paid in order to live, then you have to look at things from a perspective of like, okay, well, obviously I need money. I don't want this job. So I want to change this so that I can still fulfill that need of monetizing, something in order to survive my life. But I want to change what avenue I'm getting that money from or whatever, the thing is. Or, if you're in a crappy relationship, you're like, I want to be in love, but I don't want to be dealing with this specific person in this specific situation that's gone sour. So it's like you have to remember that at the center of everything is you, and it's not everybody else.
And everyone has their own center. Like I always feel like whatever I do is going to affect someone so terribly that I'm going to ruin their life by making this change. They have a whole life outside of whatever tiny little minor puzzle piece I'm pulling from that.
Yeah. I literally am picturing like, when you play like Twister and you have like it's like you literally have like a spinning wheel.
Yes.
And I feel like our wheels sort of, they like overlap slightly with other people's. So it's like, all right, if we're both here, and we're like this, if I'm moving or pivoting, I
might move you a little bit.
Yeah, I might force you to pivot in your own way too.
But that's showbiz, baby.
Right. But but what you do with your pivot is not my responsibility.
That's not, anyone else's problem.
Even if my pivot may have been like the
catalyst,
domino that was like, oh, this is something that's causing me to have to pivot in my life. ASMR. I feel like we can't sit and like hold on to other people's, like how is this going to affect
my biggest
other
roadblock.
people?
Yeah. I'm not scared to make pivots for myself. I'll take on anything that will come after for me. It's just not being in control of what happens to everyone else along the way.
Absolutely.
Well, even though we can't control everybody, dear listeners, viewers at home, our dear samesies, we going with that?
I like it. I like it.
Our beautiful
guys like it?
samesies, something I would love for you to do if
We
we
wanna
could
control
encourage
you
you.
is what he's
We
trying
can control you for a second. I would love for you to pivot
On over to our page.
on over to the subscribe button, to the follow buttons, to the review and rating buttons wherever you're listening to this at or watching it at. It helps out a ton. And also
5 stars.
pivot.
5 stars.
See, look at that pivot. If
5
you're watching,
stars.
that's how you do it. Yeah, pivot that mouse, pivot that finger or whatever you're using to listen. I don't know.
We don't
You
judge.
I'm not judging. You can rub whatever you want on your phone as long as it rubs our subscribe buttons.
Rub our buttons with God knows what. Okay.
Rub
I
our
love the
subscribe
message.
buttons and follow us at Honestly Same Pod. Guys, we
Speaking
did it.
of buttons.
Let's pivot on out of here.
And hit that button.